Welcome to the another SmartQA musings, which is a gentle flurry of interesting thoughts. So today we look at the human side of SmartQA. So we have probably covered various elements across the various webcasts, and today it's about the human side. So we typically test systems from multiple points of view, and more often for compliance or checking, and of course finding newer issues. So what do we normally look at? How do we test? What are the points of view? These are what typically most of us will end up probably doing or noticing at large. Aspects of, points of view from a technology, from specification, expectation, external environment, system attributes, behaviors of flows, features, impacts due to modification, regression, and probably a few others. All these are to a large degree more focused from the context of a system and its environment. To some degree, I would say users. Right? And that's, in addition to that, we might also probably look at certain implementation and construction aspects. But how empathetic are we? And empathy means we are now putting the human in the front, whoever is going to consume, whoever is going to come in front of the system, and that's what you're going to really ask. And then probably think of a few interesting things, and not just from the end user standpoint. So we'll look at it from the human side of QA. So when you look at the human side from various aspects, some of the things that probably come is, there are various humans, hopefully. So from whom? Is it from the users side as to what they do and what they expect the actual end users? Or is it probably from, let's say, system integrators who enable integration of their systems with your system/software? Or is it other makers, the makers who are actually doing the construction? So there are a variety of different humans. And all I was trying to kind of think through is, okay, what can I add value to these various humans, and how empathetic can I be? Is it, hopefully it's not just the notion of end users. So if I look at it from the user standpoint, which is probably more often what most of us are used to, and really ask what do they do and what do they expect, is primarily what we're looking at it from an empathy aspect. So I'm kind of dividing into two parts in terms of saying, hey, as a test folk, for example, if I were to look at it from the human side of QA, with respect to end users, and then ask, am I being able to empathize in their act of doing? Do I know how they do their job and therefore how they expect the system to work with it? Am I really sensitive to the various steps or the number of steps that they do to accomplish a job, and therefore look at it from the system's perspective and say, is it hopefully better or easier? Do I know what challenges them? They work in a constrained environment. They've got to get certain things done. So am I able to get into their mind to understand what are some challenges they face while they're doing the activity, and therefore think about things as to how I could be meaningful and valuable in terms of ensuring those issues don't happen? Am I very sensitive to what irritates them? Do I know, given the fact that some of them are in a situation of pressure, they might have to transact a lot of volume of work. So am I really sensitive to what might make them happy, what might irritate them? And those probably relate to the context of the act of doing, right? So I'm trying to get into the mind and say, okay, as a user is doing something, could I visualize? Can I get into his mind? Can I think of? The other thing is in terms of their outcomes, right? They do some job, they get some outcomes, the system delivers some outcomes. So from the context of value to them, how can I be more empathetic? What does it mean? How does this help them? So it's really about asking a question, how does this add value to what they're doing? Does it help them be more consistent? Does it help them to do faster? Does it help them to do better? How does it really help that individual per se? Does it ease the job of doing, or does it reduce the friction of doing things? What can frustrate them? What kind of outcomes if they get? Would they be upset and frustrated, and simply because the fact they're not able to accomplish what they wanted to do? And that's what I was trying to talk about. Does it improve consistency? Does it improve productivity? So I'm trying to look at the users from the angle of the doing side and the outcome side, right? And that's one view that I'm trying to take from the notion of users. Now, if I look at it from the SIs, people who probably integrate the software with your software, your system. So, which means it's a different kind of a user. Obviously, it is a system integrator. So your system may be part of some other system, but it may not necessarily have a UI or consumer in the typical sense. It's rolled into somebody. So quite naturally, I have to really ask, okay, somebody, I am giving maybe a bunch of APIs, or I'm giving some set of subsystems or libraries or components or services, whatever form or fashion I deploy, or maybe a message sequence that they have to send to me, and I get send back outputs. Do I know how they will use me? What are sequences? And what are constraints? What are attributes that they may expect? What constraints they may have? What attributes may they expect? And of course, when I change, when I morph, when I release new versions, the sensitivity to understanding how I might possibly affect them, right? And I'm quite sure a lot of us who use certain softwares, certainly open source, have seen certain challenges that constantly occur when we have to upgrade external components, external libraries, external frameworks, and therefore we do go through certain pains, right? And that's the idea that I was trying to bring up, and to say, how do I enable a more smoother integration with my software? Or how can I ensure that it is smoothly integratable with my software? And that's like another side. So it's not just about end users who are real people with real software. It's also other guys where my software goes under the hood. And by the way, there could also be regulations that they may have to comply with, and therefore I have to ensure that I have to probably come into play. So would I want to keep an open mind on what might be potential regulations that the system integrators have to possibly comply with, and maybe they change over time, and therefore I have to be responsive to that too. So it's more from a regulatory aspect. Let's look at it from the maker side. That is people like us who probably construct the system and software. So what do you mean by empathy with the makers? What do they do? So if you look at the typical life cycle, yeah, there is some spec, there is some construction phase, design, code, there is some test, which is what we probably end up doing most of the times. There are people who will customize products. That means they will take the product, they will do some customization. Maybe there is a professional services team, and they might deliver it, or there may be integrators with other pieces and then put it into place. There might be people who deploy, people who support, people who maintain. So there are various stakeholders in the life cycle from the maker standpoint, right? And what we're really asking is, how can I be empathetic in using the idea of life cycle of application? So if I kind of walk through that a little bit, this is what some of the ideas may be. So which means if I look at it from the perspective of product owners, product managers, who are probably looking at from spec, what could I contribute? How could I help? How could I add value to them? How could I understand them better? And therefore, maybe when we ask questions as to why, what, and maybe give suggestions, maybe it's more clarifying questions rather than more confrontational questions, because both of us are trying to help each other, right? So you can't just say that. Maybe it's not as nice to say, hey, this is what you gave me, and this is bad, good, ugly, unclear, or ask a question which is irritating and confrontational, but rather I'm saying, let's figure it out. maybe help him or her discover a better answer. Maybe an interesting way of how I deal with it, because all I'm trying to do in the context of development is to see how I can add, how I can be of some value and utility to the various people from my role. And maybe if I have suggestions with related to, we should probably not do this, we should do this differently. Maybe you're trying to put your experience from how it has been used, applied, problem seen from a user-centric perspective, and maybe offer suggestions, right? And good in that way, I probably am becoming more sensitive to the people of the makers of the spec, which could be owners and product managers and so on and so forth. What could I do from a developer? I mean, a developer, we use this dichotomy of development testing, we sometimes are seen as a bit of a confrontation. But how we could probably be a little more empathetic to them is they have to deal with a lot of choices that they make, with possibly information that is ambiguous, information that is conflicting, and choices they make probably create certain debt in the entire process. And therefore, what we're really saying is there a way by which I could help them spot certain ambiguities, certain conflicting terms, help them make choices and help them make a better set of choices so that hopefully they will be able to release things faster, better, with lesser rework if possible, right? And if I could even think in terms of helping them put in certain hooks for testability, helping them figure out how they could test it better, that means that you're easing up their way they construct. If attributes are not very clear, or attributes are ill-stated, or attributes are still not well understood, maybe helping them understand so that they make their appropriate design choices. They figure out appropriate algorithms and frameworks to be able to do it, right? Or libraries to put it. So clarification of attributes could be of use. So I'm not just looking at it purely from a systemic standpoint of a life cycle. I'm trying to kind of put the developer's face, so to speak, in the foreground and then say, what would they feel? What can I contribute? The same way I did it for, let's say, the product owner. And the same thing I'm kind of going to do from the rest of the folks. I'm leaving aside test because that's us. So if people are going to customize, that means you have a product team and a product engineering team, and then you do custom development for specific customers as a customization work. And maybe there is a separate team. So obviously, when I test, I'm just not just ensuring that the product is good, but I'm also have to kind of ensure that people who take the product and extend it to offer specific solutions to customers, which is the customization team, what would they face, right? So in a way, it is like, that's in one set of internal customers. So maybe things like, are the configuration tools, if any, are they intuitive? Are they labeled? Is there proper error messages? Is there some safe rollback options? Is there some good undo mechanisms? Is documentation sensible, accessible, useful? So things that I would kind of put the focus of the person of customization, and then say, okay, how do I help them, right? And we are not just looking at it purely from a product standpoint. And then there may be integrators, people who integrate our software, like what we talked about, system integrators, early on. And they may not be part of your maker cycle. I'm just looking at it from their making cycle. And therefore, consistency of certain APIs, predictability, logs, error messages, responses, edge cases, things like authentication, any environment-related stuff like issues, timeouts, retries, throttlings, rate limits. That's what they would be interested in, right? So if I'm building a library, I'm building a framework, I'm building a component, that probably is going to be consumed by other makers who integrate, then I need to keep this in mind. And these are also important quality attributes that I need to possibly validate later. But more than anything else, we are becoming sensitive because we are trying to put that point of view. So we just try to extend a very multi-dimensional point of view from the human side. in addition to system side, and we know both are reasonably interconnected. So we are trying to take the system side on one side and trying to validate, looking at it from different angles. And then we are jumping over and saying, okay, somebody is consuming it, somebody is using it, somebody is, seeing some problem with it. So what could they be? And ensure that these are complementary in nature. That's what we're doing. Now, maybe if it's a large system, maybe somebody deploys it, which means they set it up, they configure it, they migrate data, they do a variety of different things before the system is ready to be turned over to their external customers, right? So things like environment settings, flags, variables, are they clear? Maybe there are logs, audit trails. Are they meaningful? Are they searchable? Right? And those are the ones that you probably would want to very much similar to some of these would also apply to people who will come in later. That is the support staff. I'm not going to belabor the point of use because it's something that we more often understand. So what we're trying to really ask is the actual end users, and that actual end users, which is the use next to deploy and top, is primarily about who are the various persona or other systems which are going to consume, and therefore you're going to look at various types of. So it's a large enterprise system. There might be different classes or types of end users, right? And I'm not going to belabor the point, but that's specific to the end users in that particular domain. The standard ones of correctness and attributes and easiness and friction and usability, all those obviously come in, but more importantly, in that particular domain are the things that you need to know is what probably be more interesting. When it comes to support, guys who ultimately are on the field, they are supporting the software, they receive issues as tickets, and they're supposed to turn it around. And you may have multiple levels of support, L1s and the L2s and so on. So let's talk about the frontline staff. So customer said something, they want to check out a log, they want to see some message, they want to, if they have any tools to aid them to figure out, then they can use them. So all we're really saying is, if I was a QA, would I look at it? So that's why when you go back and look at some of the quality standards, and then when you look at quality standards like I think IEEE 930, if I'm not mistaken, 930, what was it? 20, I forgot the number. It was originally 29. I'm skipping the number. It's IEEE standard, which basically talks about the various attributes a good software system shall have. And you will actually find out some of them are internal attributes and some of them are external attributes. So things like supportability, maintainability, testability, etc., come on the internal quality attributes, whereas things like your performance and security, reliability, functionality are to a larger degree external attributes, right? So if you really look at the larger context from the quality attribute standard, which is available, as part of the IEEE standard, so to speak, and you attach a human to each of these, then I think this is what we will get, right? And finally, of course, when you look at the maintenance aspect, I think if there are guys who are going to maintain software, that means there is a product team, there is a customization team, maybe there is a maintenance team if it's a large enough product, or people double up, right? Sometimes if it's a smaller organization, we all play multiple roles. But when I flip over and play the role of a person who's going to maintain the application or product or whatever, then I'm looking at it from, are the test scripts clean, well documented, easy to run, functionally correct, and so on. And people who maintain also need to understand if the choices that were made are available, because there would be debts created because of certain design choices that some people would have made. So which means, are they aware of certain choices that were made and therefore debts that were put into place? And those are possibly aspects of documentation that might come, and there may be many more. I'm not necessarily putting on the comprehensive list of the human side, the empathy of a test person for all the makers, in a very comprehensive fashion. But I hope you get the drift. We talked about initially from users, we talked about it from system integrators, and we talked about it from the makers. And all I was trying to look at it is, it's not just about end users. So now the question that comes is, okay, from whose point of view? Let's take a slightly different look. We talked about various specific roles. But when you look at the larger picture, we are producers. Somebody consumes, and therefore that's how some of the ideas came in. So we said product managers, owners, developers, testers, integrators, support, etc. are under the ambit of producers, which is what we briefly talked about. This is a slightly different pictorial. We talked about it from end users. But remember, end users is not limited to the guy who uses your system, because truly speaking, if enterprise grade product is sold and there is an end user or a set of end users who use different classes of different types of end users, remember, he or she may not be the business guy who had made the choice to deploy this application. There might be a sponsor. So as a person, as an organization, it is probably important from an organization stance that the sponsor who actually gave the money, who authorized the buying of our system/software, feels good about his choice. It's not just the end users who are happy with their use. I think the sponsor has to also kind of appreciate the fact, okay, this investment has paid off. It has improved our productivity, it's improved our speed, it has improved our quality, it has done something to our business, right? So large IT applications, I think you have to worry about it. So which means I have to also wear a bit of a hat of a sponsor and ask, what do they expect? Which is what I think at the end of the day, marketing folks, sales folks worry about. Because at the end of the day, they need the sponsor to make further investments in terms of scaling the application, increasing license revenues, being in a longer term, maybe even becoming a reference customer, and so on and so forth. Oh, by the way, it doesn't stop there too. It continues on to customer's customer. Because I am a company who bought your application and I'm rendering or I'm giving some certain services to my external customers. So if I buy your software and you use it and I'm happy, my boss is happy, so to speak, my sponsor is happy, it's equally important that the work that I do is manifests itself as something valuable and useful to my end customer, because I have to grow my business, right? And therefore, I am taking one level above and saying, maybe I would love to keep this idea that my customer's customer. So that helps me to get me a larger picture. Now, are we saying that I'm able to do all of that, or will be able to do all of that at the same time? It may not be, because all of us are constrained with respect to releases and budgets and times. But that doesn't simply mean that we ignore. It simply means it'd be nice to kind of get an appreciation and understand potential impacts across. So we talked about producers, we talked about consumers, and this is the other set. The other producers, the people who integrate the software with yours, right? The other makers. So those the system uses and takes information from. Sorry, this is the guy who we use. So other makers whose software. So I'm really expecting something from them. So they have their own constraints. So basically I'm saying, hey, if I'm using some external third-party tool, maybe it does a few things well, it may not do a few things well. So am I aware of what it can do well, what it cannot do well, what it could pose a risk, and therefore account for it? Because ultimately a customer sees my product. He does not see what other pieces that I have used. In the same way, we might also generate some outputs or integrate it with other systems. So we feed the information from our system to other systems, right? In a large enterprise, you might have a financial system, an HR system, a supply chain system, and so on and so forth. So there might be large other system the system feeds into. So the worry that you're really worried about, that you need to worry about, is the fact that your information that is going is clean, it's safe, it's good, and so on and so forth. So I'm just trying to look at it from the point of view of producers, consumers, other producers whom I consume, other consumers who consume from me, and then ensure that I kind of close the circle. It's also equally important to understand that empathetic tester sees this chain of systems, right? This is what we talked about, just seeing the chain as producers to consumers, other producers to me, and me as a producer to the other consumers, so that we can visualize that we are not just an isolated piece. And if I take a much more expansive view, then possibly I see a chain of systems. And remember, we talked about this. I just wanted to kind of conclude by saying that an empathetic tester sees the chain of humans too, which is what we talked about. The makers in the early stage, the product managers, the owners, the engineering managers, the developers and testers as to what they might need, what they would benefit by my empathy, my wisdom, my value. And then, of course, there's the intermediaries who come before the customer and between the producer, which is the customization folks, the deployment folks, the support folks. And finally, of course, to sum it up, the end users and the sponsors and the customer's customer. So we started off with an idea of end users, as users as in terms of end users, SIs, and and the third set. And then we went on to life cycle, and then we kind of connected onto the notion of producers, consumers, other producers, and then looked at it from a chain perspective. So at the end of the day, we might do a fantastic job from a system standpoint. We might use great technologies and tools. We might have great methodologies, but never forget at the end of the day, there is some human who's hopefully benefiting. So I think at the end of the day, smart assurance is not just about systems. It is actually going beyond the realm of systems. It is about being human, which I think in every discipline, every walk of life, be it a sales, be it in marketing, be it in engineering, in this case, be it in testing, is a fact that ultimately there is a human who is consuming, and hopefully he or she sees some benefit, and he or she is happy with what we're doing. And that's where I want to conclude with, that it is not is about going beyond systems. It is fundamentally human, and that to me is the empathetic side of QA, or the human side of QA. So thank you so much.